For anyone embarking on the journey to understand the history of education in America, the story of educators is of great importance. The roles of teachers are closely tied with the country's view of education. Therefore, as the needs of the country have changed, so too have the demands placed on American teachers. These demands have in turn shaped the evolution of educators. From the informal teachings of the basics of citizenship by parents and clergy, to the school teachers of the 19th century teaching the facts needed to survive, to the certified professionals of today, the evolution of educators has come a long way.
The earliest regulation of education goes all the way back to the 1642 law in Massachusetts, which proclaimed that parents or masters must teach principles of religion and capital laws. 5 years later, in 1647, another law was passed stating that for every 50 families in a town, there must be at least one teacher. However, national teacher regulation did not extend much further than that during this time period. Each state had their own method of training their teachers. For example, the state of New York had its own private academies, which taught educators how to teach. Though some other states had similar private institutions, there was no general standard of teacher training or regulation.
The new century ushered a time of major change into the world. This all changed with the turn of the 19th century, which in turn marked major changes for education and America's teachers. At the beginning of the century, women began to enter the field of education, bringing with them a domestic and maternal aspect into the younger grades. Teaching was one of the few careers considered appropriate for 19th century women, who were still very restricted and were expected to be the upholders of virtue and domestic life.
At this time, the profession of teaching was still relatively unregulated, and teachers did not require certification. However, this changed in 1834 when Pennsylvania became the first state to require prospective teachers to pass a basic test in reading, writing, and mathematics. Teacher training and certification continued to change throughout the 1800s. Academic teacher training was first formalized in 1807 with the inception of normal schools. These schools offered short courses in educational methods in order to teach high school graduates to become teachers. However, normal schools were not popularized immediately. Some states, such as Massachusetts, did not support normal schools until 1839.
In rural areas that did not have a normal school, the local school boards would run teacher institutes to educate teachers in both academics and pedagogical subjects. New York also followed this trend, running their own teacher training programs within their districts well into the 1930s. In the 1840s, a very important person entered the scene, Horace Mann. Mann was a strong believer in public education and the teaching profession. Throughout the decade, he established the first common schools in America, which of course created a need for more educators.
Since male teachers at this time were generally using the teaching profession as a stepping stone for their careers, many did not wish to work in the less prestigious common school. Due to this shortage of male educators, women were hired more often, which gave them a stronger foothold in the profession. However, the majority of the female teachers hired at this time were young girls, around the age of 15, who were considered qualified because they had graduated from 8th grade. Because of their age, these young educators often had trouble controlling their students, especially since some of the male students were bigger than they were.
Even though the number of female teachers was growing, they were still not considered equal to male educators and therefore were paid a mere third of what men were earning. In 1850s Pennsylvania, this meant a paycheck of $20 to $22 a month. The difference in salary was clearly an issue, one that was a strong concern of Horace Mann. In 1843, Mann traveled around the country collecting data, finding that
journeymen, shoemakers, carpenters, blacksmiths, painters, carriage makers, wheelwrights, harness makers, cabinet and piano makers, all earned more than educators of the time.
The need for teachers increased once again in 1851 when Massachusetts instituted a compulsory attendance law. Because of the increasing number of teachers, teaching moved from a job towards a profession, and in 1857 the National Education Association was founded. This teachers' union advocated for teachers on issues such as standardized teacher training and lockstep salaries. In 1897, another teachers' union arose, the American Federation of Teachers. Like the NEA, they worked to improve teacher salaries and pensions.
The book, The Teacher's Assistant, published in 1859, paints a portrait of teachers at the time. In the 1870s, common school enrollment jumped to 7.6 million, and by 1871, there were 125,000 teachers ready to meet society's demand. By the late 1870s, the majority of states required that teachers pass a locally administered test in order to get certified by the state. These tests evaluated basic skills and knowledge.
In the late 1800s, major changes were occurring in the United States, such as increased Western expansion, immigration, and industrialization. Because of this, school districts grew at an equally rapid rate. For example, in 1880, there were 225,000 teachers in the United States, but merely 10 years later, the number rose to 340,000.